Hello everybody, I'm sorry about yesterday. I had a few technical issues and I thought I'd uploaded it, but it just completely disappeared. A few things before we start. Big shout out to Harvey, Jack, Paige and Oliver, who have all sent in fantastic work this week. Hello to my mum, who's also watching these videos. And if you hear a noise like a Chewbacca in the background, that's my dog who's asleep next to me at the moment. Here we go. Chapter 5, At a Venture. The voyage of the Abraham Lincoln was for a long time marked by no special incident, but one circumstance happened which showed the wonderful dexterity of Ned Land, that means he's good with his hands, and proved what confidence we might place in him. The 30th of June, the frigate spoke some American whalers, from whom we learned that they knew nothing about the narwhal. But one of them, the captain of the Monroe, knowing that Ned Land had shipped on board the Abraham Lincoln, begged for his help in chasing a whale they had in sight. Commander Farragut, desirous of seeing Ned Land at work, gave him permission to go on board the Monroe, and fate served our Canadian so well that instead of one whale he harpooned two with a double blow, striking one straight to the heart and catching the other after some minutes' pursuit. Now, it's a good point there about context. We're quite horrified as modern readers hearing about him harpooning two whales, but that was quite acceptable back then. They hadn't realised that whales were endangered species. Decidedly, if the monster ever had to do with Ned Land's harpoon, I would not bet in its favour. The frigate skirted the southeast coast of America with great rapidity. The 3rd of July we were at the opening of the Straits of Magellan, level with Cape Verges, but Commander Farragut would not take a tortuous passage, but doubled Cape Horn. The ship's crew agreed with him, and certainly it was possible that they might meet the narwhal in this narrow pass. Many of the sailors affirmed that the monster could not pass there, that he was too big for that. The 6th of July, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the Abraham Lincoln, at 15 miles to the south, doubled the solitary island, this lost rock at the extremity of the American continent, to which some Dutch sailors gave the name of their native town, Cape Horn. The course was taken towards the northwest, and the next day the screw of the frigate was at last beating the waters of the Pacific. "Keep your eyes open," called out the sailors, and they were open widely, both eyes and glasses. That's not reading glasses, that's binoculars. A little dazzled, it is true, by the prospect of $2,000, had not an instant's repose. Day and night they watched the surface of the ocean, and even nyctalopes, which is an animal that can see in the dark, whose faculty of seeing in the darkness nyctalopes, not nyctalopes, whose faculty of seeing in the darkness multiplies their chances 100-fold, would have had enough to do to gain the prize. I myself, for whom money had no charms, was not the least attentive on board, giving but few minutes to my meals, but a few hours to sleep. Indifferent to either rain or sunshine, I did not leave the poop of the vessel. Now leaning on the netting of the forecastle, now on the taffrail, which parts of the ship, I devoured with eagerness the soft foam which whitened the sea as far as the eye could reach. And how often have I shared the emotion of the majority of the crew, when some capricious whale raised its black back above the waves. The poop of the vessel was crowded in a moment. The cabins poured forth a torrent of sailors and officers, each with heaving breast and troubled eye, watching the course of the cetacean. I looked and looked till I was nearly blind, whilst Consul, always phlegmatic, kept repeating in a calm voice, "If, sir, you would not squint so much, you would see better." But vain excitement. The Abraham Lincoln checked its speed and made for the animal signalled, a simple whale or common cachalot, which soon disappeared amidst a storm of excretion. And that's the water and air blowing out the top of it. But the weather was good. The voyage was being accomplished under the most favourable auspices. It was then the bad season in Australia, the July of that zone corresponding to our January in Europe. But the sea was beautiful and easily scanned around a vast circumference. That means they had luck was in their favour. The 20th of July, the Tropic of Capricorn was cut by 105 degrees of longitude, and the 27th of the same month we crossed the equator on the 110th meridian. This passed, the frigate took a more decided westerly direction and scoured the central waters of the Pacific. Commander Farragut thought, and with reason, that it was better to remain in deep water and keep clear of continents or islands, which the beast itself seemed to shun because there was not enough water for him, suggested the greater part of the crew. The frigate passed at some distance from the Marquesa and Sandwich Islands, crossed the Tropic of Cancer, and made for the China Seas. We were on the theatre of the last diversions of the monster, and to say truth, we no longer lived on board. Hearts palpitated, fearfully preparing themselves for future incurable aneurysm. That means he was so frightened they thought they'd have a heart attack. The entire ship's crew were undergoing a nervous excitement of which I can give no idea. They could not eat, they could not sleep. 20 times a day, a misconception or an optical illusion of some sailor seated on the taffrail would cause dreadful perspirations, and these emotions, 20 times repeated, kept us in a state of excitement so violent that a reaction was unavoidable. And truly, reaction soon showed itself. For 3 months, during which a day seemed an age, the Abraham Lincoln furrowed all the ways of the northern Pacific, running at whales, making sharp deviations from her course, veering suddenly from one tack to another, stopping suddenly, putting on steam, and backing ever and anon at the risk of deranging her machinery. And not one point of the Japanese or American coast was left unexplored. The warmest partisans of the enterprise now became its most ardent detractors. So partisans mean people who are in favour of it. Now they don't want to do it anymore. Reaction mounted from the crew to the captain himself, and certainly, had it not been for resolute determination on the part of Captain Farragut, the frigate would have headed due southward. This useless search could not last much longer. The Abraham Lincoln had nothing to reproach herself with. She'd done her best to succeed. Never had an American ship's crew shown more zeal or patience. Its failure could not be placed to their charge. There remained nothing but to return. This was presented to the commander. The sailors could not hide their discontent, and the service suffered. I will not say there was a mutiny on board. It's like a riot. But after a reasonable period of obstinacy, means being stubborn, Captain Farragut, as Columbus did, asked for 3 days' patience. If in 3 days the monster did not appear, the man at the helm should give 3 turns of the wheel, and the Abraham Lincoln would make for the European seas. This promise was made on the 2nd of November. It had the effect of rallying the ship's crew. The ocean was watched with renewed attention. Each one wished for a last glance in which to sum up his remembrance. Glasses were used with feverish activity. There was a grand defiance given to the giant narwhal, and he could scarcely fail to answer the summons and appear. 2 days passed. The steam was at half pressure. 1,000 schemes were tried to attract the attention and stimulate the apathy of the animal in case it should be met in these parts. Large quantities of bacon were trailed in the wake of the ship, to the great satisfaction, I must say, of the sharks. Small craft radiated in all directions around the Abraham Lincoln as she lay to, and did not give a spot of the sea unexplored. But the night of the 4th of November arrived, without the unveiling of this submarine mystery. The next day, the 5th of November, at 12, the delay would, morally speaking, expire. After that time, Commander Farragut, faithful to his promise, was to turn the course to the southeast and abandon forever the northern regions of the Pacific. The frigate was then in 31 degrees 15 north latitude and 136 degrees 42 east longitude. The coast of Japan still remained less than 200 miles to leeward. Night was approaching. They just struck 8 bells. Large clouds veiled the face of the moon. Then in its first quarter, the sea undulated peaceably under the stern of the vessel. At this moment I was leaning forward on the starboard netting. Consul, standing near me, was looking straight before him. The crew, perched in the ratlines, examined the horizon, which contracted and darkened by degrees. Officers with their night glasses scoured the growing darkness. Sometimes the ocean sparkled under the rays of the moon, which darted between two clouds, and then all trace of light was lost in the darkness. In looking at Conseil, I could see he was undergoing a little of the general influence. At least I thought so. Perhaps for the first time his nerves vibrated to a sentiment of curiosity. "Come, Conseil," said I. "This is the last chance of pocketing the $2,000. "May I be permitted to say, sir," replied Consul, "that I never reckoned on getting the prize, and had the government of the Union offered $100,000, it would not have been none the poorer." "You are right, Conseil. It is a foolish affair, after all, and one upon which we entered too lightly. What time lost! What useless emotions! We should have been back in France 6 months ago." "In your little room, sir," replied Conseil, "and in your museum, sir. And I should have already classed all of your fossils, sir, and the Barbarossa would have been installed in its cage in the Jardin des Plantes, and have drawn all the curious people of the capital." "As you say, Conseil, I fancy we shall run a fair chance of being laughed at for our pains." "That's terribly certain," replied Conseil quietly. "I think they will make fun of you, sir. And must I say it?" "Go on, my good friend." "Well, sir, you will only get your deserts." "Indeed." "When one has the honor of being a savant, a very clever person, as you are, sir, one should not expose oneself to—" Conseil had not time to finish his compliment. In the midst of general silence, a voice had just been heard. It was the voice of Ned Land shouting, "Look out there! The very thing we were looking for! On our weather beam!" Chapter 6. At full steam. At this cry, the whole ship's crew hurried towards the harpooner. Commander, officers, masters, sailors, cabin boys, even the engineers left their engines and the stokers their furnaces. The order to stop her had been given, and the frigate now simply went on by her own momentum. The darkness was then profound, and however good the Canadian's eyes were, I asked myself how he had managed to see, and what he'd been able to see. My heart beat as if it would break. But Ned Land was not mistaken, and we all perceived the object he pointed to. At 2 cables' lengths from the Abraham Lincoln on the starboard quarter, the sea seemed to be illuminated all over. It was not a mere phosphoric phenomenon. Good plosive alliteration there. It's fricative alliteration. Phosphoric phenomenon. Plosive alliteration is bang. The monster emerged some fathoms from the water, and then threw out that very intense but inexplicable light mentioned in the report of several captains. This magnificent irradiation must have been produced by an agent of great shining power. The luminous part traced on the sea an immense oval, much elongated, the centre of which condensed a burning heat whose overpowering brilliancy died out by successive graduations. "It is only an agglomeration of phosphorific particles," cried one of the officers. "No, sir, certainly not," I replied. "Never did phthalates or salpate produce such a powerful light. That brightness is of an essentially electrical nature. Besides, see, it moves. It's moving forwards, backwards. It is darting towards us." A general cry arose from the frigate. "Silence!" said the captain. "Up with the helm! Reverse the engines!" The steam was shut off, and the Abraham Lincoln, beating to port, described a semicircle. "Right the helm! Go ahead!" cried the captain. These orders were executed, and the frigate moved rapidly from the burning light. I was mistaken. She tried to sheer off, but the supernatural animal approached with a velocity double her own. We gasped for breath. Stupefaction more than fear made us dumb and motionless. That shock. The animal gained on us, sporting with the waves. It made the round of the frigate, which was then making 14 knots, and enveloped us with its electric rings like luminous dust. Then it moved away 2 or 3 miles, leaving a phosphorescent track like those volumes of steam that the express trains leave behind. Nice simile there. All at once, from the dark line of the horizon, whether it retired to gain its momentum, the monster rushed suddenly towards the Abraham Lincoln with alarming rapidity, stopped suddenly about 20 feet from the hull, and died out. Not diving under the water, for its brilliancy did not abate, but suddenly, and as if the source of this brilliant emanation was exhausted. Then it reappeared on the other side of the vessel, as if it had turned and slid under the hull. Any moment a collision might have occurred, which would have been fatal to us. However, I was astonished at the manoeuvres of the frigate. She fled and did not attack. On the captain's face, generally so impassive, was an expression of unaccountable astonishment. "Mr. Anorax," he said, "I do not know with what formidable being I have to deal, and I will not imprudently risk my frigate in the midst of this darkness. Besides, how attack this unknown thing? How defend oneself from it? Wait till daylight, and the scene will change." "You have no further doubt, Captain, of the nature of the animal?" "No, sir. It is evidently a gigantic narwhal, and an electric one." "Perhaps," added I, "one can only approach it with gymnotus or a torpedo, both weapons on the frigate." "Undoubtedly," replied the captain. "If it possesses such dreadful power, it is the most terrible animal that was ever created. That is why, sir, I must be on my guard." The crew were on their feet all night. No one thought of sleep. The Abraham Lincoln, not being able to struggle with such velocity, had moderated its pace and sailed at half speed. For its part, the narwhal, imitating the frigate, let the waves rock it at will, and seemed decided not to leave the scene of the struggle. Towards midnight, however, it disappeared, or, to use a more appropriate term, it died out like a large glowworm. Had it fled? One could only fear, not hope it. But at 7 minutes to 1 o'clock in the morning, a deafening whistling was heard, like that produced by a body of water rushing with great violence. The captain, Ned Land, and I were then on the poop, eagerly peering through the profound darkness. "Ned Land," asked the commander, "you have often heard the roaring of whales?" "Often, sir, but never such whales the sight of which brought me in $2,000. If I can only approach within 4 harpoon lengths of it." "Better to approach it," said the commander. "I ought to put a whaler at your disposal." "Certainly, sir." "That will be trifling with the lives of my men." "And mine too, sir," simply said the harpooner. Towards 2 o'clock in the morning, the burning light reappeared, not less intense, about 5 miles to windward of the Abraham Lincoln. Notwithstanding the distance and the noise of the wind and sea, one heard distinctly the loud strokes of the animal's tail, and even its panting breath. It seemed that, at the moment that the enormous narwhal had come to take breath at the surface of the water, the air was engulfed in its lungs, like the steam in the vast cylinders of a machine of 2,000 horsepower. Thought I. A whale with the strength of a cavalry regiment would be a pretty whale. We were on the qui-vive till daylight, lookout, and prepared for the combat. The fishing implements were laid along the hammock nettings. The second lieutenant loaded the blunderbusses, which could throw harpoons to the distance of a mile, and long duck guns with explosive bullets, which inflicted mortal wounds even to the most terrible animals. Ned Land contented himself with sharpening his harpoon, a terrible weapon in his hands. At 6 o'clock, day began to break, and with the first glimmer of light, the electric light of the narwhal disappeared. At 7 o'clock, the day was sufficiently advanced, but a very thick sea fog obscured our view, and the best spyglasses could not pierce it. This caused disappointment and anger. I climbed the mizzenmast. Some officers were already perched on the mastheads. At 8 o'clock, the fog lay heavily on the waves, and its thick scrolls rose little by little. The horizon grew wider and clearer at the same time. Suddenly, just as on the day before, Ned Land's voice was heard. "The thing itself! On the port quarter!" cried the harpooner. Every eye was turned towards the point indicated. There, 1.5 miles from the frigate, a long blackish body emerged a yard above the waves. Its tail, violently agitated, produced a considerable eddy. That's like a force in the water. Never did a caudal appendage beat the sea with such violence. So it means like his tail. An immense track of a dazzling whiteness marked the passage of the animal and described a long curve. The frigate approached the cetacean, and I examined it thoroughly. The reports of the Shannon and of the Helvetia had rather exaggerated its size, and I estimated its length at only 250 feet. As to its dimensions, I could only conjecture, which means guess, them to be admirably proportioned. While I watched this phenomenon, 2 jets of steam and water were ejected from its vents and rose to the height of 120 feet. Thus I ascertained its way of breathing. I concluded, definitely, that it belonged to the vertebrate branch class Mammalia. So it had got a backbone, and he said it was a mammal. The crew waited impatiently for the chief's orders. The latter, after having observed the animal attentively, called the engineer. The engineer ran to him. "Sir," said the commander, "you have steam up?" "Yes, sir," answered the engineer. "Well, make up your fires and put on all steam." 3 hurrahs greeted this order. The time for the struggle had arrived. Some moments after, the 2 funnels of the frigate vomited torrents of black smoke, and the bridge quaked under the trembling of the boilers. I like that personification of the frigate there. The Abraham Lincoln, propelled by her powerful screw, so that's its propeller, went straight at the animal. The latter allowed it to come within half a cable's length, then, as if disdaining to dive, it took a little turn and stopped a short distance off. This pursuit lasted nearly 3/4 of an hour, without the frigate gaining 2 yards on the cetacean. It was quite evident that at this rate we should never come up with it. "Well, Mr. Land," asked the captain, "do you advise me to put the boats out to sea? You enjoying this?" No. There she is. Hello. Right. Sorry, I got distracted then, showing you my dog. "No, sir," replied Ned Land, "because we shall not take that beast easily." "What shall we do then?" "Put on more steam if you can, sir. With your leave, I mean to post myself under the bowsprit, and if we get within harpooning distance, I shall throw my harpoon." "Go, Ned," said the captain. "Engineer, put on more pressure." Ned Land went to his post. The fires were increased, the screw revolved 43 times a minute, and the steam poured out of the valves. We heaved the log and calculated that the Abraham Lincoln was going at the rate of 18.5 miles an hour. But the accursed animal swam too at the rate of 18.5 miles. For a whole hour the frigate kept up this pace without gaining 6 feet. It was humiliating for one of the swiftest sailors in the American Navy. A stubborn anger seized the crew. The sailors abused the monster, who, as before, disdained to answer them. The captain no longer contented himself with twisting his beard. He gnawed it, so he chewed at it. The engineer was again called. "You have turned full steam on?" "Yes, sir," replied the engineer. The speed of the Abraham Lincoln increased. Its masts trembled down to their stepping holes, and the clouds of smoke could hardly find way out of the narrow funnels. They heaved the log a second time. "Well?" asked the captain of the man at the wheel. 19 miles and 3/10, sir." "Clap on, more steam." The engineer obeyed. The manometer showed 10 degrees, but the cetacean grew warm itself, no doubt, for without straining itself it made 19 3/10 miles. What a pursuit! No, I cannot describe the emotion that vibrated through me. Ned Land kept his post, harpoon in hand. Several times the animal let us gain upon it. "We shall catch it! We shall catch it!" cried the Canadian. But just as he was going to strike, the cetacean stole away with a rapidity that could not be estimated at less than 30 miles an hour. And even during our maximum speed, it bullied the frigate, going round and round it. A cry of fury broke from every one. At noon, we were no further advanced than at 8 o'clock in the morning. The captain then decided to take more direct means. "Ah," said he, "that animal goes quicker than the Abraham Lincoln. Very well. We will see whether it will escape these conical bullets. Send your men to the forecastle, sir." The forecastle gun was immediately loaded and slewed round, but the shot passed some feet above the cetacean, which was half a mile off. "Another more to the right," cried the commander, "and $5 to whoever will hit that infernal beast." An old gunner with a grey beard that I can see now, with steady eyes and grave face, went up to the gun and took a long aim. A loud report was heard, with which were mingled the cheers of the crew. The bullet did its work. It hit the animal, but not fatally, and sliding off the rounded surface, was lost in 2 miles' depth of the sea. The chase began again, and the captain, leaning towards me, said, "I will pursue that beast till my frigate bursts up." "Yes," answered I, "and you'd be quite right to do it." I wished the beast would exhaust itself and not be insensible to fatigue like a steam engine, but it was of no use. Hours passed without its showing any signs of exhaustion. However, it must be said in praise of the Abraham Lincoln that she struggled on indefatigably, so without being tired. I cannot reckon the distance she made under 300 miles during this unlucky day, November the 6th. But night came and overshadowed the rough ocean. Now I thought our expedition was at an end, and that we should never again see the extraordinary animal. I was mistaken. At 10 minutes to 11 in the evening, the electric light reappeared 3 miles to windward of the frigate, as pure, as intense as during the preceding night. The knoll seemed motionless. Perhaps, tired with its day's work, it slept, letting itself float with the undulation of the waves. Now was a chance of which the captain resolved to take advantage. He gave his orders. The Abraham Lincoln kept up half steam and advanced cautiously so as not to awake its adversary. It is no rare thing to meet in the middle of the ocean whales so sound asleep that they can be successfully attacked, and Ned Land had harpooned more than one during its sleep. The Canadian went to take his place again under the bowsprit. The frigate approached noiselessly, stopped at 2 cables' length from the animal, and following its track. No one breathed. A deep silence reigned on the bridge. We were not 100 feet from the burning focus, the light of which increased and dazzled our eyes. At this moment, leaning on the forecastle bulwark, I saw below me Ned Land grappling the martingale in one hand, brandishing his terrible harpoon in the other, scarcely 20 feet from the motionless animal. Suddenly his arm straightened and the harpoon was thrown. I heard the sonorous stroke of the weapon, which seemed to have struck a hard body. The electric light went out suddenly, and 2 enormous waterspouts broke over the bridge of the frigate, rushing like a torrent from stern to stern, overthrowing men and breaking the lashing of the spars. A fearful shock followed, and thrown over the rail without having time to stop myself, I fell into the sea. Well, what an exciting end. See you tomorrow.